Welcome everyone to MidCamp 2025. I'm very excited to give my talk today. Thank you for having me. My name is Kat Shaw. I'm a lead engineer and CPACC certified digital accessibility specialist. So my goal today is to answer the question, what the heck is ARIA? So it's a beginner's guide to ARIA for accessibility. So please take note on the top of the slide, the bit.ly link and the QR code if you could. Those link to these slides, and I'll also, there's a link to these slides on my session page, and also I'll share the link to these slides on my social media accounts later. So this presentation is based on a 2019 article I wrote on Lullabot.com that was an exploration of using ARIA. I still today share confusion with ARIA. I think everybody does, right? And for me, this can even come across as imposter syndrome. So I want everybody to understand that. Nobody's an expert at ARIA, right? So I want to give a quick thank you to the sponsors of MidCamp because we couldn't do it without them. So everybody just give a quick round of applause. Okay, so quick intro. That is me. So that is me at 1.5 years old with what I would call a fairly impressive afro. I can still do this with about 3 days of no brushing. It's pretty crazy. I scare myself in the mirror with it. So I'd like to ask just a quick question. Just raise your hand if you can or yell out. How many in here would consider yourselves newbies to accessibility? Okay. How many in here would consider themselves, they have some experience with accessibility, but they're not experts? Okay. And how many in here think, I got this going. I know what I'm doing. Cool. Okay, cool. Thank you for that information. That really helps. So, again, my name's Kat Shaw. I am a very short woman with a mix of brown and gray curly hair, more gray than brown than I used to in this picture. I have an olive complexion and I wear glasses, and I live in Perry, Kansas, which is a small town that's about an hour outside of Kansas City, and I love it there. Again, I'm a lead engineer at Lullabot. I specialize in front-end development and digital accessibility and usability. And I have been a web developer since 1999, so a long time. Digital accessibility specialist since 2005. A Drupal developer since 2012, and a CPACC certified digital accessibility specialist since 2017. And later, if you want to connect with me, you can reach me on the various social media accounts, especially LinkedIn at Kat Ann Shaw. And I also have a website with the same username, katanshaw.com. So, okay, so I'd like you to meet Maya, my daughter. This is with her when she was younger. I have photos of her throughout this talk just to provide some levity and lighten things up a little bit, and my family, so I just wanted to mention that so you don't you're like, what the heck is this going on? So that's what that's about. So we're going to go over what we'll cover on this talk, and that is ice cream. So my talk includes technical and non-technical stuff that will cover all the bases. The first thing is, what is ARIA? So what does the term ARIA even mean? Where does ARIA come from? So what are its origins and who is managing it now? What can ARIA do? What does and doesn't it do? Oh, I skipped. Who is ARIA for? How do people with disabilities use ARIA, and what kind of support is there for ARIA? So what can ARIA do? What does ARIA do, and what doesn't it do? When shouldn't I use ARIA? So here we'll go over the 5 rules of ARIA use. When should I use ARIA? So what are some real-world examples of when you should use ARIA? How does Drupal use ARIA? Here we'll talk about, how does Drupal incorporate ARIA into core, contributed modules, features, and best practices? And then finally, what's some confusion on using ARIA? So here we'll talk about some common use cases showing the confusion with ARIA. But first, I'd like to just go over some common accessibility terms that you'll hear me talk about and you may have heard about in the community. So the first one, obviously, is ALI. So ALI is basically A is obviously the A in ALI, Y is the Y in ALI, and the 11 counts for the 11 letters in between. WCAG is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and the current version is 2.2. ARIA is the Web Accessibility Initiative, and then ARIA is the Accessible Rich Internet Applications. W3C is the World Wide Web Consortium, and so that's an international community that develops the web standards. AT is for assistive technologies, and that's screen readers, braille keyboards, and switch devices. Screen reader is software used by blind and visually impaired users to gather web content. Native HTML is standard built-in HTML elements, and then semantic HTML is the HTML tags describing the meaning and structure of the content on a web page. The web rotor is something for screen readers that's a visual list display of screen readers' page elements. So what they'll see are links, headings, landmarks, things like that. And then the DOM, I'm sure that you've all heard of that. That's the document object model, and that defines the logical structure of web documents. So, what is ARIA? And where does the term ARIA, what does the term ARIA even mean? This is a really terrible plane ride. Oh my gosh, that was terrible. Okay, so ARIA is shorthand for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. And it's a set of attributes added to HTML elements, and it defines ways to make content accessible to AT users. Again, AT is assistive technology. And it bridges the gap when accessibility issues can't be managed with native HTML. So it gets added directly to the accessibility tree, which is a subset of the DOM. Where does ARIA come from? You know, what are its origins and who is managing it now? It was first developed by the ARIA Working Group as part of W3C's WAI. The working draft was first published in September of 2006, and the current recommendation is 1.2, and the draft in development is 1.3, and you can find out more at the link at the bottom of this slide. So who is ARIA for? How do people with disabilities use ARIA, and what kind of support is there for ARIA? So ARIA is for users of assistive technology, and assistive technology is a big umbrella for a lot of different devices. So this first photo I have here represents screen reader users. It is an NVDA screen reader with a rotor list of headings, and this is used by people with visual impairments. And these users rely on software like JAWS, NVDA, VoiceOver, and TalkBack to convert digital text to speech and Braille output. The second photo here represents voice recognition software users. This image is a voice recognition software icon, and people with motor disabilities use this. And these users use programs like Dragon Naturally Speaking to control interfaces through voice commands. And the third photo here represents keyboard-only users. This image is of a computer keyboard. So users with motor impairments or repetitive strain injuries would use this, and they either cannot or choose not to use a mouse and navigate solely with a keyboard. So this next group of photos I have here is the first one represents switch device users. And this is a single switch device. And this is used by people with severe motor disabilities, maybe like with missing limbs would be an example. These users navigate using specialized input devices with limited controls. The second photo here represents refreshable Braille display users. So this is actually an image of a refreshable Braille display. People who are blind and both deaf and blind use this, and they rely on tactile Braille output devices. It's kind of interesting. If you can't really see it from the photo, but the little I don't know if you know. Everybody knows what Braille is, right? So the keyboard actually pushes up as they're using it. It's pretty cool. If you should try to look and see if you can find a video of one sometime. The third photo here represents screen magnification users, and it's a text magnification icon. And people with low vision use this, and these users use magnification software that benefit from the enhanced semantic information that ARIA provides. So this next group of photos that I have, they all represent users with cognitive disabilities. So the first photo is a woman, an older woman with a laptop computer. The second photo is an x-ray of a traumatic brain injury. And the third photo is a young man with developmental differences. So with cognitive disabilities, it covers a wide range of conditions, and it affects their ability to think, learn, and solve problems. And these users can benefit from clear structural information and predictable navigation patterns enhanced by ARIA. So I'd like to ask the audience a question in a sec of if anyone feels comfortable mentioning if they use any of these assistive technologies. I can say that I recently had a college course that had a book, and the images couldn't expand. And so I actually used a magnification extension on Chrome to be able to look at it. That would be an assistive technology. I use keyboard tabbing quite a bit for forms because I don't see the point of using a mouse all of the time. And more recently, I have been having issues which is likely arthritis, getting older. And so I've been looking into using dictation for just regular speech, but also possible code entry. So those are some of the things I'm looking at using for assistive technology. Does anybody in here have any examples of assistive technology they might be using?
Screen reader.
Screen reader?
But I just use it to kind of like process as I'm like.
Yeah. I use that too. If I have a big thing of text, I'll use the speech on the browser. That makes sense, yeah?
I rely heavily on captioning.
Captioning, yeah.
Because of hearing loss.
Yeah, captions. And a lot of us, right, use captions or subtitles when we watch movies. And hopefully we're all going to get older, right? So we're all going to have hearing loss, we're all going to have sight issues, so we're all going to have to use a lot of this assistive technology as we get older, right? So when it comes to support for ARIA, ARIA is not supported by all technologies, but it's always growing. And supporters include browsers, assistive technologies, applications, and JavaScript toolkits. Complete support is difficult to achieve because of its complexity, but most current technologies support some form of ARIA, which is good. And you can track its progress using this link on the bottom. And again, I'll share all of these slides. It's the Power Mapper link, and it's great. So when it comes to ARIA and HTML5, HTML5 doesn't have 100% browser and screen reader support. And so you should always check support status of HTML5 elements. And when HTML5 elements don't have full support, it's best to add both HTML5 and ARIA attributes. We'll talk a little bit more about that whole thing later, but you can check these helpful resources later. Okay, so what can ARIA do? What does and doesn't ARIA do? And what are ARIA roles, states, and properties? So ARIA does modify how content is presented to AT users in the accessibility tree, but it does not add functionality or behavior to an element, including JavaScript behavior, and it doesn't change an element's structure in the DOM, it enhances it. So that's really important to know. Check out that link in the bottom for more information there. So here we're going to talk about ARIA roles, which are used to define UI elements or user interface elements. And once a roles element is set, it doesn't change. And you can see a list here of role types and example roles. So next up, we're going to dive deeper into these roles, states, and properties. And we're going to talk about what they are. We're going to talk about commonly used examples and how they get used by the user. So the first set here are abstract roles, and they act as the foundation for all other roles. They're utilized by browsers and should never be used in code. And instead, they are used to give roles their meaning and context, and they help with the addition of new roles. They get used by the user. Their abstract roles are in the background, and they shouldn't be adjusted. The next type of roles are document structure roles, and they provide descriptions for sections within a page. They aren't normally interactive, And some common examples are image, document, and heading. And they get used by the users to identify content while navigating through a page. They help give context to the net content they're taking in. And HTML5 often doesn't provide, HTML5 often provides context, but screen reader support is sometimes lacking. And this screenshot here is a list of headings. Okay, so the next one is landmark roles. They are created for easier navigation, and they identify each section of content within a page. Some common examples are banner, content info, and form. And they get used to navigate through a page. And some examples would be screen reader analysis, the start and end of each landmark role on a set of a page, and maybe like a web router will display a list of these roles and regions. And the image here you see is a Drupal skip to main content link. That's an example of a landmark role. If you we'll talk about widget roles. So there's two versions or two examples of widget roles. There's a standalone UI, and then there's a composite UI. The similarities are that they both add semantic meaning to elements, and they both get used by the user to interact with a page. They can include completing forms, opening and closing tabs and panels, and navigating menus like a main or sidebar nav. Their differences are that for standalone UIs, they're part of larger composite widgets, and common examples are alert, button, and checkbox. And in this screenshot, you can see an example of the Drupal admin UI tab menu. So that's an example. And the composite UI acts as containers that manage other contained widgets. So examples of that would be the combo box, grid, and list box and menu. And in this example, you can see the main menu navigation for Drupal. So next we're going to talk about states and properties, and you'll notice that these are grouped together, and that's because the WAI spec often groups them together. So there are some similarities and differences with these as well. So some similarities are that they both have similar features. They both give specific information about an object. Excuse me. They both form part of the definition of the nature of roles, and they both are treated as ARIA prefix markup attributes. But the differences are that property values are less likely to change, and the state values can change frequently. But there's some additional notes on this, is there are exceptions to the rule, and both are commonly referred to as attributes in ARIA. So drag and drop attributes, they convey information to AT about drag and drop elements. Obviously, they include draggable elements and their drop targets. Some common examples are ARIA drop effect and ARIA grabbed. And they get used by the users of AT to drag and drop attributes, to interact with drag and drop components. And they use various methods regardless of their disability. So I've seen people use like their keyboard to actually use drag and drop. It's pretty cool. This is a screenshot. I'm sure everybody's seen this with the drag and drop for the menu admin UI, right? And so a lot of people use their mouse, but you can actually use your keyboard if it's done right. So next up, we have live region attributes. They indicate changes in content for a user of AT. And so two common examples here are ARIA live equals polite and ARIA live equals assertive. So polite makes it so that messages get read aloud with the flow of content, but assertive makes it so that messages interrupt the flow of content and are read aloud immediately. So these messages can include information on how the user can proceed, and you don't need to add focus to these elements. So make sure you don't do that. Common examples of these are ARIA atomic and ARIA busy and ARIA live. And it gets used, like I said, to inform users of what's happening on the page. It does this with regular messages as they change on the page. So some examples would be even like a search results. You should have this done on there. And notifications provided after forms that have been submitted. So obviously any kind of form you have, you should have this set up. Oh, sorry. The screenshot is just of a status message on Drupal. You've seen these quite a bit on the admin side. So with relationship attributes, they add relationships between elements that can't be determined otherwise. And some common examples are ARIA described by and ARIA labeled by. And these help users understand when information is related when navigating the page. And they help users gather additional data from various elements. And elements can include forms, menus, and tabs and panels. And this screenshot is of a contact form with form fields. Forgot the arrows. And then the next one is widget attributes. So they are used for common UI elements that receive input from users. They're done while processing those actions and information. Common examples here are ARIA checked, ARIA disabled, and ARIA label. And they get used to more easily use interactive UI elements. UI elements can include forms and modals, and they help to avoid confusion during the input process. So this screenshot is a contact form with a disabled field. Okay, I know that was a lot, so we got through that whole thing. So when shouldn't you use ARIA? You like this picture? It was fun. So it's a great question. It's funny you should ask. And here we're going to talk about the 5 rules of ARIA use. So quickly, the 5 rules of ARIA was developed by the Web Platform Working Group. And they provide guidance on when and how you should use ARIA. And it was published by W3C as part of the WAI ARIA spec. And we're going to go over them now. So the first one is the most important rule, and I'm going to read it here. It's use native HTML at all times unless it's absolutely positively impossible to make an element accessible otherwise. That's actually the first rule of ARIA. So translation, when in doubt, choose native HTML. That's a nice shorter way of saying it. So some examples would be when this may not be possible would include when an HTML element doesn't have accessibility support, or a design doesn't allow for a specific native element, so like there's limitations on styling, or when the ARIA role or property isn't available in native HTML. So there's, again, another link on the bottom that you can check the status of HTML accessibility on elements there. The second rule of ARIA use is don't change native HTML semantics unless you absolutely have to. So in almost all cases, native HTML will work just fine. Objects created in the browser won't automatically become what they're trying to emulate. So in this example here, you can see the span tag, and instead of using this span element with role equals button, you should instead use a button, an actual button element. And the reason is because with a user of assistive technology, they use the spacebar, right, to activate the button. And if you use a span with role equals button, it's not going to actually work. You have to add a bunch of additional JavaScript, and why do that when you can just add a button and it's going to work, right? The third rule of ARIA is all interactive ARIA controls must be keyboard accessible. So here I'm going to discuss the tab index attribute. So adding tab index equals 0 to an element adds that element to the logical tab order. And these elements don't normally receive keyboard focus. So an example would be like a div tag and you add tab index equals 0. But adding tab index equals 1 or tab index equals 2 is a no-no. Nay, don't do that. Because anytime you add a positive number to a tab index, what it does is it forces the element as a numbered item in the tab order. And maybe, I don't know if you've ever done that, but you've gone to a site and you maybe tab through it and it jumps all over the page. That's why that's happened. So that makes that web application or website inaccessible. So again, you should never add a positive number to a tab index. So here is an example of a div with tab index equals 1 and Amy June is not dull. But if you add tab index equals 0, you can see that Amy June is awesome. That's an inside joke, by the way. So the fourth rule of ARIA is that for all focusable elements like links, buttons, and form elements, you should never add role equals presentation or ARIA hidden equals true. Doing so makes focusable elements inaccessible to users of AT. This, of course, causes confusion for them. So elements like tab index equals 0 are included in this list. So here, for example, when creating a disabled submit button, instead of adding ARIA hidden equals true, you should add ARIA disabled equals true. And what that does is it makes the button perceivable, disabled, and it conveys that it's dim to the users of AT. There are different circumstances for different scenarios, like a skip to main content would be a good example, where it's hidden and then you focus on it and it just gets displayed and then you go away and it's hidden. So I actually don't know if I have the link to it. Oh yeah, I do. So you see the link that says hiding content properly? That's a link to Drupal's recommended hiding content properly. It's a great web page. It has really great information on how you can hide content properly in an accessible way. So I highly recommend checking that out. The fifth rule of ARIA is you must give all interactive elements an accessible name. So that only happens when the accessible name of the interactive element has a value. So instead of adding a static label like this within a span tag, which doesn't do anything for a user of assistive technology, you should add a proper label like this, which has a for, which connects to the ID within the input. And what this will do on the top one is add a visible label for the input, or on the bottom you can add the ARIA label search, and what that does is add a visually hidden label for the input. Either one of those is an accessible label. Okay, when should I use ARIA? Let's go over some real-world examples of when you should use ARIA. So with descriptive labels, let's see, do a time check here. Okay, good. We've all had to deal with read more links and learn more links. Raise your hand if you had to deal with those. Yeah, we don't like them. Try not to use them if at all possible. Try to talk people out of them if you can, but sometimes we can't escape them. So there are ways to make them accessible using ARIA. You can use ARIA label or ARIA labeled by the attribute to accomplish this. So instead of having just a regular read more link like this, you can add an ARIA label to it like that, which would add read more about sustainable gardening. And what happens is the ARIA label actually takes precedence over the read more with screen reader users, so they'll actually hear the longer ARIA label instead of just the read more text. But visually, the sighted users will actually just see read more. I'll actually show an example of how to do this using views later on. So with live regions, alerts and messages don't get automatically announced to users of assistive technology. So to accomplish this, you must add ARIA live regions to those elements. They help AT to detect and read changes out loud to your users. So instead of adding a static message like this within a div tag, which is, it didn't work, sorry, you would just add role equals alert, and what that does is it makes it get read aloud to users of AT. And when I say that, I mean screen reader users generally. With relationships, creating parent-child relationships between elements is a key part of making things accessible. So this can be done using commonly used ARIA attributes like labels, ARIA labeled by and ARIA described by, or controls like ARIA owns and ARIA controls. So in this example, I have a parent-child relationship that's been created between the image elements ARIA details attribute and the details elements ID attribute. And what this does is it gives the users of AT a meaningful image description for this image of a sunflower field. So the image description that's read aloud is children running through a field of sunflowers in Perry, Kansas. Okay, everybody okay in here? A lot of talking, I know. Okay, cool. So forms, adding ARIA attributes to form elements makes forms accessible for users of assistive technology and helps forms to become easier to interact with. And common examples, again, are ARIA label by, ARIA label, ARIA autocomplete, role equals search is another one. So in this example, you'll see the matching label and input elements like before. The for attribute first name here goes with the ID of the first name. Also, you'll notice that there's the required, the autocomplete, and the ARIA-complete. So the required tells AT users that it's a required field. The autocomplete tells them that it's a first name field. Let's see here, autocomplete equals given name. And the ARIA-complete tells users that it's an inline field. So when I was mentioning the autocomplete, that's actually a token that you can look up a list of tokens, and given name specifically connects to first name. There's one for first name, last name, address, all of that. Okay, so how does Drupal use ARIA? How has Drupal incorporated ARIA into core and contributed modules, features, and best practices? So the accessibility initiative that started in Drupal 7 is awesome. It's continued to this day and beyond, and there's been many advances in both core and contributed modules, right? And so we're going to talk about some built-in modules and features of core, some contributed modules created specifically for accessibility, and also how you can contribute to making Drupal accessible. So first up, we have audio alerts. They're called ARIA alerts, but I just changed it to audio alerts. It's easier to understand. So consistent audio alerts are provided via Drupal's Drupal announce JavaScript method, and this allows AT users to hear alerts on the page. And remember what we talked about earlier, the two allowable values are for ARIA Live is polite and assertive, like that. So here I have a video, and you know what? I did not hook up my Bluetooth, so I hope this is loud enough.
Web content. There is a problem. Alert. Heading level 2. There is a problem. List 11 items. Link. Enter a name. Link. Enter a message. Link. Enter an account number. Link. Enter an arrival date. Link. Enter a start time.
Could everybody hear that okay? So that's what a screen reader sounds like when it's going through. That would be a summary, a form field summary linked with links to the form fields. So you can hear how that is important, right? If you didn't have that all hooked up, they would have no idea what they need to correct on the form. So that's why it's important to have that set up. So inline form errors is another module. It's in core, and it adds form errors to Drupal core, but unfortunately it's not enabled by default, so you need to enable it yourself. But when users fill out a form, it adds a linked summary of errors above the form. It adds inline form errors below each form field, and all errors are marked up with ARIA. So this, of course, helps users of AT drill down on form items to correct, and it makes it easier for all users to complete a form. So here I have a screenshot, hopefully you can see it okay, and it has a before and after. So on the left, the before is of a regular form, and it has the form field in red and the surrounding red box around it. And on the right, you could see with the inline form fields error module, what it looks like when you have a meaningful error message below the form field. So it's pretty cool. One thing I would add is that we add an icon next to the error, which is great for people that are colorblind, because obviously if you're colorblind and you can't see the red, it's difficult to see. So it's always good to add a little icon next to it. Yes?
Does that apply to, like here, is this a public form? I guess this is an administrative form. Would that also apply to like web forms and other forms that are rendered on the Drupal site?
Yeah, I would do this to any form. I would do this to admin forms, for your employees internally, and your external forms. Yeah, and that's because there's I didn't have it on here, but there's a tag is specifically, those are standards for the admin side of anything. So for us, that would be the admin side of Drupal. And so there are actually standards for that. So you should make sure that that's accessible just like the external part of the website. So very good question. Okay, so keyboard tabbing order. Tab order is a top priority of users for assistive technology, of course. Just so you know, when you do keyboard testing, that applies to screen readers, so it's all connected. So with Drupal's tabbing manager, developers can add and remove tab constraints from a page using controlled tab order. Examples would be like modals, dialogues, and pop-up messages. And also, key elements in Twig templates automatically receive keyboard focus. So an example, like I mentioned earlier, would be the skip to main content link, right? So, which is awesome. I mean, that's core. You don't have to add it anymore. You used to have to add it. So in this video here, I have two videos. The first one is a form in dark mode with proper tabbing order. It's very quick. So I'm just tabbing through it. And the second video is the same form, but it has improved styling to add a visible tabbing order. So you could see it more clearly. So that's very important to make sure that the tabbing order is correct, and also make sure it's visible as they go through the page. Yes?
So is that by default? You have to add some CSS to be able to see it?
I had to, in that case, I added CSS, and it's, the default keyboard visibility is good, but when you're dealing like dark mode, sometimes it's not as clear as it can be. So I always like to make it even more clear if possible, especially like even like thick white border around form fields is kind of like what I like to do, because especially with the black, so it really stands out. So with the views module, this is what I was talking about earlier. Several ARIA attributes can be added with the views module. So a good use case would be to add a meaningful label to a read more link. So if you open a view and you select a field and you open the rewrite section and you add a bit of custom code combined with tokens to create a descriptive label, this is what you can do. So you could see that you have the ARIA label, read more about, and you have a token with a title. And if you do that, this is what will happen. So I'm going to show before and then after. So this is what happens if you have read more links that you don't fix. This is the web rotor for a screen reader. They'll just see multiple read more links, and that's not helpful. They have no idea what they're reading about, right? So this is what happens when you fix it. So you have individual custom read more links for each thing. So which one does everybody like better? This one or that one? So you can see that that's much better. So with contributed block ARIA landmark roles, or the block ARIA landmark roles contributor module, that adds additional elements to the block configuration forms, and it gives site builders the ability to add landmark roles to any block on the site. So this is a screenshot showing what the admin view looks like here, and you can add roles, titles, region settings, and much more. It's pretty cool. It's a very simple module. So the CPACC Editor abbreviation module, it adds an abbreviation button to the toolbar in CPACC Editor, and when users select the button, it creates an accessible abbreviation at the location of the user's cursor. So here I have a screenshot, and you could see it adds an abbreviation explanation fields. And so in this example here, I have the abbreviation of KS and the explanation of Kansas. So what happens there is when, if you have KS there, if somebody hovers over it, it'll actually have Kansas. So that's really important. Oh, and I believe with screen reader users, that'll actually get read aloud. That's an important thing to know. So with Editoriale, accessibility checker, hopefully a lot of people have been hearing about this one. So it checks for issues automatically as you edit the page in CPACC Editor 5. It checks render content after a page has been authored in draft or published view. It focuses exclusively on content issues by adding alerts and tooltips, and it gets added to the Drupal CMS Accessibility Tools recipe on install. So this screenshot here shows a check for the use of uppercase text, so you can see what it looks like. And it links to more information and allows the users to ignore or mark it as okay. So it's a really great tool. I highly recommend you checking it out. So how can you contribute?
What was the name of that module?
Sure, no problem. Editoriale.
Okay.
Yeah, it's great. How can you contribute? You can attend regular Drupal accessibility meetings. We have the Drupal accessibility office hours. They're at various times. It's a little confusing, but that's because it's a global group. A lot of them are in Europe, so 1 month, is it 1 month? Hold on, see various times. They're all up there. Yeah, every other month it's like in the morning or in the afternoon. There's also the Drupal CMS Accessibility Weekly Meeting that's at 9 a.m. Eastern. You can contribute to Drupal.org issues using these hashtags, so either accessibility or a combination of Drupal CMS and ALI. You can join the Drupal Slack accessibility channel. And you can also just contact me through LinkedIn or through my website, catanshaw.com, and I will connect you with whomever and get going. So, let's see, 40. Okay, I'm gonna get on going. What confusion is there with ARIA? Let's see here. I love that face. Okay, buttons versus links versus anchors. How can you tell which one to use? So a button triggers actions on the current page. So let's see, forms, search, videos, slideshows, right? And it's triggered with a keyboard spacebar. So the first example is a save button here. The second is a link. It triggers actions in different ways depending on the type of links. So an internal link which redirect users to a different page and docs on the same site. An external link redirects users to another site or document. And then you have the anchor, and the anchor redirects users to another section on the same page. So an example for that would be the skip to main content link. So I have this question, but I'm going to go ahead and skip it. I think the answer, everybody knows the answer. Will adding role equals button to div turn it into a button?
Nope.
No. I mean, it can, but you have to do a bunch of extra stuff, right? Okay. Redundant ARIA landmark rules. One big area of confusion relates to this first rule of ARIA, and it's understandable. Landmark rules are automatically detected with HTML5 elements. So always ask yourself, are we supporting older browsers? That's the question. It's a simple question. If the answer is yes, use native HTML5 and ARIA together, like header, role equals banner. And if the answer is no, use native HTML5 alone, like header. You don't have to add the role equals banner. And I see that quite a bit on websites that don't need to support older browsers. You don't need to add both. So that's just something to really keep in mind. And you can get updates from that link on the bottom. Go ahead.
Can you comment at all about what the state of older browsers, what does that mean?
I'd say, like, back in the day, it was like IE, IE 11. Now,
Is this becoming less of a problem?
Yeah.
Moving forward in time?
Yeah, because Microsoft stopped supporting it. So maybe like Aubrey was talking about it. Sometimes you work at a place that, especially in government, where it's like a Microsoft shop. So they support older versions of things. So that might be a situation where you want both. But it really depends on your client and also who you work for. If you work for a government, you might have different situations. But if you have a client who is like, I want to support the modern stuff, the modern browsers, yada, 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 then you don't have to worry about it. But the most robust choice is to use both. So if you're in doubt about it, just use both.
Use both. Okay, thank you.
So that's what I would say. And I forgot to highlight. There we go. Okay, so landmark roles, HTML5 and 4. This is just a list of them, so you can see the matching of the header, role equals banner, and all of the others. And some say never use ARIA because overuse causes bad feelings, which is completely understandable. Several concerning ARIA rules and properties in HTML, there's several that are still not available in native HTML. They are needed to make the web easier to navigate for AT users, and you can see a list here, that link. There's a time and a place for ARIA, so just look up the standards and guidelines if you're unsure, and when in doubt, use native HTML. Key takeaways. Let's go over those. 1, stick with native HTML controls whenever possible. 2, use ARIA to fill the gaps in native HTML or as a last resort when elements cannot be made accessible otherwise. And 3, remember that it's a balancing act. You've got this. Are ya ready? Pun intended. Got it. Okay, this is my daughter now. She's 14. She turned out to be pretty normal. She's still a little kooky. And I want to share some great resources. Again, I'll share these. You can get to them. Great resources and credits. And I want to say thank you to Maya for letting me share those images of her. She's awesome. And don't forget about Contribution Day tomorrow, 10 to 4, and the Drupal Coffee Exchange. And I want to say thank you. This is her 8th grade graduation. So I know we're right at time, and I know it's lunch, and I know people are hungry. So if anybody has any questions, I do have that link, but if anybody wants to ask any other questions right now, that feel free. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask?
Is there any way to deal with the captcha and reCAPTCHA? Because those render the forms non-compliant.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
The CAPTCHA and the reCAPTCHA modules for like I'm human or whatever.
Oh, the CPACC. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
With CPACC, yeah, CPACC is a real problem. The biggest one I see a lot, and the question was, how do you deal with CPACC when it comes to accessibility? One of the things I see a lot are math problems on CPACC, and that's the one that I really have a problem with, because, especially for people with cognitive disabilities. So although, you're thinking, oh, that's easy, 1 + 4, I would never use a math problem CPACC, first of all. Secondly, if you have one that has alternatives, like you can see that it has the image, but it says you can use sound, and it has different alternatives, if you have to use it, that's the one I would try to use, where it has alternative options for people.
But that would still leave the form non-compliant, right?
Yeah, I try to avoid them at all times personally, but there are times when security, and that's an exception. I mean, if you look at the standards, security is an exception with forms. So it's one of those things you try not to if you don't have to, but sometimes security with certain websites like a bank is going to outweigh that. But if you have to do it, try to make it as accessible as possible. So this is what I would say.
Maybe this is a small one, I hope. You had said that one of the times that we should use ARIA would be for like relationships, creating parent-child relationships. How is that different from just nested semantic HTML? How would I know when I'm not expressing a parent-child relationship?
I think a good example would be with form fields. So if you're talking like a form field and you have and the question was, how do you know, I'm sorry, I keep having to repeat it for this, how do you know when you should use relationships with ARIA versus just native HTML? So an example would be a form field. So if you have a form field, you have a label, and you have those connected with like the attributes. So the for attribute on a label connects with the ID attribute on a form field. So that right there creates a relationship. And then if you want to add an error for that form field, that's where you add ARIA labeled by.
Okay.
Also ARIA described by would maybe add like, for instance, instructions on how to use the form field, like help. Would be an example. So those are ways that the ARIA connecting the relationships to the form field really make a difference.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Going once? Going twice? Going 3 times? Sold. Okay, no, just joking. Thank you, everyone.
CAPTCHA widget.
Oh, and reach out to me on any time if you have any other questions.